The Fabulous 413 podcast is funded by Greenfield Savings Bank, providing residential lending advice. Greenfield Savings Bank, member FDIC, DIF, equal housing lender, NMLS 409187.
Welcome to the Fabulous 413. I'm Chloe Smith.
And I'm Monty Belmonte. Later in the show, we'll spend some time with the person challenging Richie Neal for his spot, the 1st Congressional District Independent Nadia Milleron, and learn what she hopes to bring to the position should she win.
But first, arts, and lots of it. Right near the bridge in Northampton, where a museum is bringing unsung artists to light.
If you're coming out of downtown Northampton, you go past the relatively new Rotary. You can either go bowling on the right at Spare Time Bowling or take a left and come to the Anchor House of Artists, which is a place I've heard a lot about over the years, but this is my first time actually getting to be in here.
I'm Michael Tillyer. I'm the co-director, along with my wife Susan Foley, of the New England Visionary Artists Museum, home to the Anchor House of Artists.
Differentiate between those two things, Susan, who also joins us.
This area here is our museum area, differentiating somewhat from our showrooms.
Over 28 years from the inception of the Anchor House of Artists, a shared and subsidized studio for artists living with neurodiverse conditions, we've expanded and we've invited the artist community to self-stage shows here. In all those years, we've also lost some of the original members, and their works have been left to us and willed to us. And so what do you do with those things? You conserve and you educate. Thus, the Visionary Artists Museum.
And we heard about from our friend Christos Palames, who's been on the show many times, that you, Chris, were offered an opportunity as a budding artist yourself.
Yeah, we were down at Park Hill Orchard,
where we went with you last year in their accessible golf cart to view the art in the apple orchard.
Yeah, and I've enjoyed Michael's work. So we were talking, it was over a year ago, and Michael said he wanted to do an exhibition and possibly do some artists with absolutely no training. So I went, check. And then with it also being the 50th anniversary this year of my founding Stavros, it just worked out so beautifully to do this exhibition, which is in some ways elements of a graphic memoir. But I had never hung anything on a wall anywhere. And so I have put myself in Michael's hands, and he has guided me with generosity and patience. He also has the advantage of having some experience of working with people with attention deficit.
Because neurodivergence is a big part of the founding of this. Talk about that as a beginning place.
Universal access, that is the guiding word. That is something that I learned about in my life. That's actually what drew me to Christos' story. And after many years of living in this area from the 70s as an artist, I met many artists that were very, very good, but were on the edge, didn't have the opportunities. So I tried taking some work and bringing it around to galleries, and no one was interested. And I had a studio. I just thought, well, why not just open that up? And that's our humble beginnings. You know, it's expanded. I wanted the establishment to integrate, and that's where we are.
Kind of two peas in a pod, this and Stavros, then like two self-starting organizations, like addressing needs in their respective communities as directly as possible.
Yeah, and if you remember our show recently, we had the newish director of Stavros Center for Independent Living on, celebrating the 50th anniversary. You, one of the co-founders of Stavros, named after your brother.
Yeah, and Stavros, we were initially primarily people with physical disabilities, but very quickly, because the Valley has been such an important focus around reform on disability programs and policies. When we started 50 years ago, Belchertown was probably the most critical development in the area, the movement towards getting people out of Belchertown and into the community.
Not the city.
The Belchertown school. And in talking with Michael and Susan, they've had a lot of experience.
Yeah, I was at Belchertown, and working at Belchertown, and then I also got people out of the state hospital when the state hospital opened their doors and taught them how to live in their own apartments, and it was a wonderful time.
Susan and I met 35 years ago or so, and we had this kindred spirit, universal access again. And this is the world that we're looking for. Divergence means more than disability. It means people coming together, seeing each other eye to eye, and that's going to vision, looking to vision on the wall. If you look around, you'll see all these people. We call them artists, but they're entirely different visions. These artworks are talking to one another. Christos brings us a whole new page.
Well, let's roll through your exhibit here, Christos. First time visual artist here at the
New England Visionary Artists Museum. Artists is important. It's not an art museum, it's an artist museum, because we believe that art is only incidental to the life of the artist who created it.
So Christos Palames, who is, again, we're all celebrating the 50th anniversary of the organization you founded, Stavros. Walk us through, or roll us through your artwork.
So this is, I think of it as a sort of a series of chapters of a graphic memoir. It's a mix of photographs and drawings. I only began drawing with the pandemic because I had time to do it. But one of the things I wanted with the 50th anniversary of the founding of Stavros, to actually have my brother reflected in this. Some of the pictures over there are drawings of Steve.
Who is Stavros?
Stavros in Greek. And it was actually, well, in the family, I'm Christos, he's Stavros. In Greek, Christos is rather obvious. Stavros is cross. So he was my older brother, so in our family, the cross came before the Christ.
That's quite the cross to bear.
Yeah. It's kind of, So that was the beginning, was this idea of doing what I call another turn of the wheel, obvious symbol for me.
Because if you don't know, Christos is in a wheelchair. We're rolling through the exhibit right now.
I'm in a large black power wheelchair, and there's a picture over here, which was me in a fast little manual chair some years ago. The other photograph, that's one of the first photographs I was injured in a college wrestling match in 1967, compressed spinal cord injury, and that's one of the first pictures that was taken of me at Mass General Hospital after that injury.
And that's what led to you being in the wheelchair?
That's what led to me being in a chair. But my brother had died the year before. He was on his way hitchhiking to visit me at Wesleyan down in Connecticut. He was at University of Bridgeport. So I wanted to have him reflected in this story, and I did that since I didn't have photographs with some drawings. The memory was we had spent a last summer together working in 1965 in Boston. It was actually the worst water crisis in the history of the Northeast. And so we spent a summer with a group of guys, high school buddies who we played football and wrestled with, digging ditches in Boston, digging out old leaky water pipes and putting in new ones. So that was the background to bring my brother into the story. A year later, I was injured. I spent a year in hospitals. That's a rough drawing of White 9 at the Massachusetts General Hospital.
The name of the building?
That was the White Building at Mass General Hospital, where I was in the hospital for 51 weeks, and most of that time was there. So that was sort of the first chapter. But actually, Michael would let me sit down and ramble with him, and then he took the drawings and he arranged it all. He would tell me to put a little compression on my ramble, but not too much. Once he had the gist of the story, I handed it to him, and he just facilitated every piece of this.
And the curation of it and how they would be laid out here?
Artwork speaks to one another, right? And the drawings and the reflections in the photographs themselves just seem to talk. And we did have a long conversation. We sat down one afternoon. We were going through drawing by drawing by drawing. The story is very compelling. There's a very worldly story that people can hear, but there's also a very personal narrative that is important to hear. A brother who dies, a terrible accident which breaks a man. You see a recovery and a strength, mentorship with a very famous civil rights activist.
That is the drawing here. That was my mentor in college, John McGuire. I was a religion major at Wesleyan University.
I was too, but not a Wesleyan.
Aspiring there onto Greek boy, Orthodox, but, very Protestant stuff going on at Wesleyan. I took this course because Paul Tillich was on the reading list, and this fellow came in, gave a brilliant introductory, but he delivered it in a Southern accent. I had my Yankee prejudices. Well, who is this redneck? And folks told me, oh, it's John McGuire, one of the first freedom riders, friend and advisor to Dr. King. And John, who is actually the man I called as I was paralyzed on the wrestling mat because someone had to call my mother to tell her what happened, I called on John McGuire. We had already established a close relationship, but it became very, very close, and John gave me so much of the direction that guided through my career, including as I was graduating in the student strike of 1970. John called me up and said, come meet a man who's staying at my house. And that was Michael Murphy, who was the co-founder of Esalen Institute in Big Sur, California, which was then this center bringing together the new therapeutics that were coming in East meets West. Things from Asian traditions, new approaches to therapeutics out of Europe that tended to be body-oriented. So they sent me off a few years post-injury for a remarkable season in Big Sur, California, which I call my vision quest, my healing way.
It's a visionary artist's museum, so it's perfect.
That's where that picture comes from.
We will hear about that picture and more of the details of his journey out west with Christos Palames at the New England Visionary Artists Museum, along with the establishment's founders, Michael Tillyer and Susan Foley, as we discover more of how his art is connected to the organization he helped to found, the Stavros Center for Independent Living.
And we'll also spend time with the challenger for the first congressional seat in the House of Representatives, independent Nadia Milleron.
You're listening to The Fabulous 413 on 88.5 NEPM.
The Fabulous 413 podcast is funded by UMass Amherst School of Public Policy, offering graduate programs in public affairs, public policy and administration, data analytics, and computational social science. umass.edu/SPP. The Fabulous 413 podcast is funded by the UMass 5 College Credit Union, offering co-op advantage checking with cash back on all purchases, plus secure debit card controls, all from the UMass 5 mobile banking app. Insured by NCUA, umass5.coop.
This next section over, I promised you a naked encounter group.
Yes, we have heard from Christos that we would see some nudity in this. As with all good art, nudity should be involved.
Wow, that's a take.
Yeah, well, Esalen was a peculiar place, and there was kitsch and shtick, and there was also brilliance to the place.
I see a couple shticks in this picture right here.
Yeah, that's it's a basic human stuff. That was the last night of an encounter group. I was the only one with my clothes on, but I had a camera, and they wanted a group picture, so they all jammed into a redwood entranceway to a restroom, and people will see different things in that picture.
It's Freudian.
It's just a beautifully shot picture. There's just like humans and light, and it's kind of nebulous, and the only thing that's really clear is both humor and humanity.
There was too much, though, for me as a guy in a chair there at Esalen. It was like, people, won't you please keep your clothes on for a while? So I took the picture.
We are at the Anchor House of Artists down at the end of Pleasant Street in Northampton with some of the founders of the Anchor House of Artists and the New England Visionary Artist Museum, and the newest visionary artist showing us his work while celebrating the 50th anniversary of the independent living organization that you helped to found, Stavros, Christos Palames. I'm seeing some drawings over here.
It proceeds from here. If that was the kind of healing way vision quest at Big Sur, the next is the founding of Stavros. I had thought we were going to do body work. What I found the best of the stuff at Esalen was the really advanced body work like structural integration, deep connective tissue work. I had a lot of reduced breathing, I came back much healthier and more open. I thought, that's what we need. I incorporated a nonprofit thinking we were going to do assisted yoga in a heated saltwater suspension tank. It turned out that was not what was needed. But these are pictures of the very beginnings of Stavros with my co-founder, Noreen Hessian. And in this picture is with John Buck, dear friend. But John, who is one of my roommates at Wesleyan, actually, this picture was taken at the Allenwood Federal Correctional Facility, Allenwood, Pennsylvania. John was a minister's kid who should have gotten a conscientious objector, did not. He was sentenced under the Youthful Offenders Act in the Vietnam era. And this picture, he's just told me that he's going to go in a population. He's not going to do soft time. And he ended up serving the second most time of any CO in the Vietnam era as a prison organizer with people you will know, the Fathers Berrigan. So these are the roots of Stavros in a way. You know, we were of these experiences of the 60s. We brought that together and went, how are we translating this into the way people with disabilities had to get a handle on changing the world for the better?
Take us to the next part, Christos.
Well, you know, Stavros for me was, I was there for 6 years. We started in '74. The Boston Center for Independent Living started at the same time, but it was very different. In Boston, they were doing what they called transitional living, which ultimately I did not think that was the foundation for what was needed as a real people's community-based movement. I hooked up with folks from California because the first flowering of the disability movement was in Berkeley. Over here is a picture of Judy Heumann, so well known from Crip Camp, the documentary that was produced a few years ago. But the first flowering of this new political consciousness among people with disabilities was in Berkeley. Things opened up from Stavros for me as a kind of a portal to be able to be broadly involved. So the people are Mary Lou Breslin, the co-founder of the Disability Rights Education and Defense Fund, which was the leading lobbying group around the Americans with Disabilities Act. Ron Mace was the godfather of barrier-free and universal design, the design genius of the disability movement. Ed Roberts and Judy Heumann are over on this wall, probably the best-known spokespeople for the disability movement.
Can I just break into the story? Because I don't want to miss that corner corner that's filled with original drawings that are so lovely and tell just another level, the important level of this. And this is human expression. Well, first of all, you can see this. We have this little notebook underneath this case. And the reason that's there is just to talk about this man, his process in an afternoon of just drawing and drawing and drawing and drawing and finding his way through the graphite into these images. Along the wall, we have these human bodies, the outstretched man in a field of sienna going into the body that has overcome what would have been stationary. You also see the loneliness of that particular figure. It's just a lovely corner.
Yeah, and these are all new drawings by you?
I just started drawing the first winter of the pandemic. I was actually thinking about doing a traditional memoir, that is words, but there were a couple images, and I asked some friends to be my illustrator, and they kept turning me down. So I had taken a first little sketch, and I said, well, then maybe I ought to try it a second time. And I just got taken with this magic of mark making. So Judy would wake up at 4 a.m.
Your Judy.
My Judy.
Who's with us right here.
And I'd have a pencil in my mouth asleep, with a notebook. And
Judy Kimberly, who is the partner of Christos, who has been here walking through the exhibit while Christos has been rolling through the exhibit. You are pictured in a photograph rolling next to Christos. What happened in that photograph?
Well, I would tell people that we'd been together a long time and he'd always used a chair, and it occurred to me what better way to show my love than to give up walking. I mean, what's walking compared to true love? Mm-hmm. What really happened is I broke my leg.
How did it all go for you?
Well, one of the perks of living with a guy who uses a chair is I had an accessible house. Crutches are treacherous. The chair made me, you can't even carry coffee with crutches.
Yeah.
Right.
The chair made me be able to go out all over the place, do things, and then for 13 weeks, just have a really full, wonderful life.
You have 2 drawings over here in color. And I think they're the only 2 that are in full color.
That's this wonderful program, Procreate. I have an iPad. You can bring something into, and using an Apple Pencil, introduce and create color graphics. So those 2, one I think of that one of those encounter groups at SLN, on the lawn at SLN on psilocybin. Frankly, and that's also on our ballot.
That's right.
Whether psilocybin will be the next of these, and it's personally something I favor because my experience has been it has significant healing potential and also is less complicated than some of the other stronger mind-altering substances. I have found it to be a dimension of healing. And the other is of a sea otter. And that was the totem animal of being in Big Sur. But my thought was that they were looking up at the baths at Esalen going, those creatures have no fur.
And they're showing us all of their no fur right now.
But one of the things that Michael guided me towards was to go with the original drawings. 'Cause I had been bringing a lot into Photoshop and scanning and doing contrast. And the man said, nope, give me the originals.
Mm-hmm.
There's something really special about the originals too. Like Photoshop does its own thing. When you've done it tangibly, there is something about that tangibility that is really important. That said, what appealed to you about drawing as opposed to like painting or sculpting or any other form that you could have indulged in?
I would love to do painting, but my manual dexterity is very limited. And anything once it gets wet is more of a mess to deal with.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Also, it's hard to do that at 4:00 in the morning, leaning in bed.
You don't want to wake up with the paint spilled all over you in bed.
don't?
Judy doesn't want that.
I don't know. I feel like Jackson Pollock has a whole
that's
series
paint.
about basically that. Bodies in paint on sheets.
Yeah, it depends on what type of art you're going for.
We were talking about electronics and technology and art. Procreate does create access to painting for you, Christos. It is a painting medium that you can manipulate with your hand. Procreate is one of those technologies that do break through and do remain human, in that it does rely on touch.
And that's another big thing that Stavros has been doing over the years too, which is finding the technologies that are going to suit the people to help them live their best self-actualized lives.
Yeah, I mean, the transformation of technology over the years I've been involved in this world. We have a picture there of Ed Roberts. Now, he's actually in that picture, he has a mouthpiece, and he's actually pulling on and getting his breath from a portable ventilator. Mm-hmm. He traveled the world with that portable ventilator. When he was first injured, there was no respiratory support. He was post-polio. He did what was called glossopharyngeal breathing, which is a way of just swallowing air.
Wow.
And in a heroic journey at the beginning of his career, he once flew from Oakland, California to Washington, D.C. for a critical event with no respiratory support.
Whoa.
Other than swallowing air. He would sleep at night when he was close to home in an iron lung, but then the technology developed, so here he has a portable ventilator. For me, just the change in wheelchairs over time. A manual wheelchair used to be 2.5 times the weight of the chairs that people are pushing today. They were big, clunky, awkward things. The new metals, the new technology, the new design have been critical to the advance of the movement.
You have these photos span a great deal of time, so that must have been something you were interested in, Christos.
I inherited my brother's camera. He was doing industrial design at University of Bridgeport, and he had to photograph. He had an old beat-up Minolta with a 50-millimeter lens, and that was what I took to Big Sur. I was also just at the point where my hand strength had returned to the point where I could use a camera. But we lost most of that archive with flooding in our basement one year. And a few of these are photos that were taken of us. Sometimes I handed my camera, but you will see one of our beloved governor, Maura Healey, over here. This was actually taken by a TV camera crew when Maura was first running for Attorney General. That was taken down in Holyoke. And I had met her when she was first in public service, and it was around getting ADA work resurrected in the state system. That, in terms of the continuity of what I've done from that, discovering there was a disability movement on through, the ADA for me appeared right about in roughly, the midpoint of my career. And then a lot of my work had to do with really moving forward around using that groundbreaking law. And that was how I got to know Maura Healey.
And you were just recently on Beacon Hill with Maura Healey celebrating another legislative victory that you've advocated for a long time.
That was the signing of the Long-Term Care Act. And that had been, for a variety of reasons, of tremendous personal importance to my family, the provisions of that, but it had also been an advocacy focus for my dear brother Joe Tringali. That's Joe's picture, the drawing of Joe at the top. Joe and I met at Mass General Hospital in the summer of 1968, and we got him to come out to Western Mass from Boston. People said that was when he ran away to join the commune. Joe, the last couple years of his life, his focus was on certain provisions that were embodied in the Long-Term Care Act. So yeah, we made our way into Boston to celebrate that with Maura.
And you have a drawing of Maura Healey there that I think anybody who has ever seen Maura Healey would immediately recognize as Maura Healey. It's stunning and spot on. If that's what you were going for, you nailed it.
Yeah, I certainly was. When I would describe, her to friends who didn't have a lot of political engagement or interest, I would always begin with her basketball creds. To me, Maura was point guard for the Commonwealth. And, she's done pretty well since I met her.
You've still got the rest of this week through November 1st to explore Christos Palames' show, Turn of the Wheel, at the New England Visionary Artists Museum. Check neva-museum.org for the museum's viewing times and more.
And thanks again to the Anchor House of Artists founders, Michael Tillyer and Susan Foley. Time to get even more politically minded with the independent candidate challenging Richard Neal for his position in Congress. Nadia Milleron joins us next.
You're listening to the Fabulous 413 on 88.5 NEPM.
The Fabulous 413 podcast is funded by Northeast Solar, homegrown in Hatfield, Massachusetts, and providing energy savings for their customers for over 10 years. Learn more at northeast-solar.com. NEPM's podcasts are funded by Armbrook Village Senior Living in Westfield, with support services designed to help seniors age in place, including a Compass Memory Support Neighborhood. More at armbrookvillage.com.
How do we say your last name properly?
Yeah, we've heard it several ways depending on who does the interview.
It's just Milleron.
Milleron.
It's like the champagne of
It was
campaign last names.
made up, so it was invented.
Milleron High Life?
Yeah.
Milleron Highlight.
That's funny.
It's Milleron time.
Nadia Milleron is an independent candidate for the 1st Congressional District of Massachusetts in the U.S. House. Nadia is a mother, farmer, attorney, and advocate.
In 2019, Nadia's daughter was a passenger on a Boeing 737 MAX that crashed in Ethiopia, killing all on board, including her daughter. After 2 deadly crashes, instead of taking Boeing's and the FAA's word that nothing was wrong and a crash would not happen again, Nadia got involved to hold all involved groups accountable.
The advocacy is part of a family tradition. Nadia is also the niece of four-time U.S. presidential candidate Ralph Nader. Apart from advocacy, we're told Nadia Milleron also likes to bound up Berkshire Mountains barefoot, swim in ice-cold rivers, and has supported her family as a farmer over the years, in addition to showing the strength of a mother who has lost not one but two of her children. Apart from the plane crash, she lost a younger son to childhood cancer.
She is taking all of this experience and challenging Richard Neal for the seat he's held in Congress for over 30 years. From Sheffield, Massachusetts, we welcome independent candidate for Congress, Nadia Milleron. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Fabulous 413.
Thank you very much for having me. What a welcome. What an introduction.
Well, you
Thank
brought us cookies, which I don't know if
Yes.
that counts as bribery, but I'm eating it anyway.
Yes.
Our first question actually was, how do you not eat at Roberto's every week if you live in Sheffield? Because their pizza is very, very good.
We have a segment that we call Pizza Quest, where we're trying to find the best pizza in Western Massachusetts, and Roberto's in Sheffield is very high on our
We
list.
swear we'll get to the real issues, but how do you not spend all of your money at Roberto's all of the time?
Well, I guess it's partly timing is in my favor, so I only eat in the middle of the day, and Roberto's opens at 3, so that kind of helps me out. But we did have our campaign fundraiser there, and yes, they are amazing.
You also had a lot of coverage from the New York Times that was largely placed at Roberto's in Sheffield as well. Your campaign, while you may hear a lot about Congressman Richard Neal at public events, etc., he's again been in Congress for 30 years, I think it was the New York Times article that really put your name on my radar. Why run as an independent against Congressman Richard Neal?
Because I feel that the Democratic Party didn't treat Alex Morse, who was his last challenger, fairly. The Democratic Party participated in a homophobic smear against Alex Morse, and that was disproven by both the New York Times and The Intercept. So those publications interviewed the people who were supposedly the victims in that situation. And then Richard Neal got on the debate, and after it was shown, after these people were interviewed and it was shown that there were no victims, he said to the camera, "But we have to believe the victims," at a time where he knew there were no victims. And that's how the Democratic Party operates in our district. And so it's wrong way to operate. So I don't want to have anything to do with that process.
There was just last week a critique of Congressman Richard Neal from Politico. The headline in a special report said they were lobbying on legislation before his committee. They were also employing his son. Brendan Neal, son of the Democrats' longtime Ways and Means leader, has collected regular payments from his father's campaign and received business from lobbyists on tax issues. Now, the article goes on to say an awful lot of things about Congressman Neal and his level of power and his son and their relationship. Nothing alleged that is illegal. However, stuff that some people may consider to be morally suspect. What was your take about that article from Politico? You have featured it on the homepage of your campaign website, Nadia.
I was looking at Richard Neal's expenditures on the Federal Elections Commission website. And what is really revealing about that is that they're not in the district, and they're also luxury expenditures. So he's living a lavish lifestyle based off of the money that he's getting to campaign. But he's not campaigning. He's spending it on resorts in Texas and California and hotels and limousine company. And he spends $4,600 every month on his son's business. So the thing that really stood out for me about the Politico article is that those companies that pay Brandon Neal for his consulting services also get their wishes fulfilled through Richard Neal, through the Ways and Means Committee. And Richard Neal responded to that by saying Brandon Neal doesn't lobby before the Ways and Means Committee. But does he really need to lobby since he has dinner with his father and regular contact with his father? I mean, what does he need to go and appear in a formal way? No, he doesn't need to. He has access. That is what I saw on Capitol Hill. In my case, Boeing has access. And that was so intimidating for me as a person who was harmed by Boeing. I thought, how could we possibly influence this situation? We don't have money. We don't have a staff. All we have is our feet and our voices. But in that situation, it was amazing that we were able to help pass aviation safety legislation. But in this situation with Richard Neal, we have a problem in our district. We don't have enough doctors here. And there is legislation before the Ways and Means Committee to increase the number of doctors in our country because there is a shortage. So in 1997, Richard Neal voted to have a cap on the number of resident doctors. And I'm not sure what the logic was behind that, but 20 years later that was lifted, and we still have a shortage of doctors. In Boston, you don't really see it, you don't really feel it because there's a lot of specialties, there's a lot of money to be made in Boston. But the shortage of doctors is not proportionate throughout the country. There's areas where you have a severe shortage, and in our area, we have this severe shortage. Somebody I know was scheduled 18 months out with a primary care physician for a health checkup appointment. And so there is a bill to address the Resident Physician Shortage Reduction Act, and it's before the Ways and Means Committee, and it has, I believe, 175, last time I looked, co-sponsors, but Richard Neal is not a co-sponsor. Why is that? This is a huge problem in his own district. You know, he should be leading on these issues. I can see the problems in the district. I can see pathways to do something about them. The quality of life here has gone down in the last 34 years that Richard Neal has been in Congress. Yes, he does bring money in for different projects, but any municipalities will apply to the federal government for money, and then all representatives would support their municipalities in their district to receive that money. And that's what Richard Neal is doing, and that's a great thing to do, but that's not where this job ends. You have to actively address the issues which affect your people. Fentanyl is another issue. This is right before Richard Neal right now. There's a bill to cause inspection of packages coming through UPS and FedEx. That's where the fentanyl is coming into our homes. In our district, many people are dying of fentanyl. So it's very important to stop in any way that we can the arrival of this drug into our homes. And this bill is before the Ways and Means Committee. Richard Neal is not supporting it. It has bipartisan support. This bill, if Richard Neal decided right now to pass this bill, it would pass. And it would save lives. So those kind of things I would be after completely.
We are speaking with independent candidate for the 1st Congressional District of Massachusetts in the U.S. House of Representatives, Nadia Milleron. We should mention that we have reached out to Congressman Neal to come on this show. We hope he will take us up on his offer before Election Day.
We mentioned the money, and one of the things that comes up comparing you to Richie Neal's camp is that he's got literal millions of dollars to campaign, and you are running an independent, grassroots-only, like individual donor-based campaign. How has that changed the outlook and the strategy for your campaign, knowing that you're up against all of this money? This is something that the other independent that we talked to, Cornelius Shea, talked about in trying to take on McGovern, too, is just the machine of money that you are up against.
Well, I have to use mass media. How do you contact 500,000 people? There's 515,000 voters in our district, 770,000 people. So you have to reach people through radio, television, digital ads, texting. I've been able to raise $500,000, which seems like a ton of money to me. It's about $1 per person in the district to communicate with them, just to let them know that I'm running. I did contact the Secretary of State because they produce a pamphlet, and the pamphlet has the offices that people are running for, but it doesn't have the names of the candidates. So that's irresponsible on this part of the Secretary of State, because then voters don't have the chance to look up the person. Everyone should know that I'm running, but instead, when I called the Secretary of State, they said, oh, you have to campaign. Well, I've spent $57,000 a month on television ads per month. I mean, I have done everything I can do to campaign. I have busted a gut, as they say, right? I've put out my very best effort. But ultimately, I believe that the voters' vote is not for sale, and that if people have the information, that they will vote for the best candidate. And I'm a fighter, and I have experience on Capitol Hill. I understand how Capitol Hill works. I understand the money flow, and I'm ready to confront it. So I'm hoping that all those people who have heard of me will tell people who have not heard of me, spread it by word of mouth, and, we can make an upset in this election. We can do it.
Coming up, more about Milleron's past interactions with current Congressman Richard Neal. We'll also explore some of her plans for international and domestic policy that could have a real impact on Western Mass, and her thoughts on the presidential race.
You're listening to the Fabulous 413 on 88.5 NEPM.
We are speaking with Nadia Milleron, who is an independent candidate for the 1st Congressional District of Massachusetts in the U.S. House of Representatives, challenging the 3-decade-long incumbent Congressman Richie Neal, who is the ranking member of the Ways and Means Committee. I know that, sadly, I mean, it's so tragic, and I don't want to cry talking to you about this, about losing 2 of your children. But when you decided not just to grieve, but to act and to become an advocate for airline safety, you went to Capitol Hill many, many times. Tell me, your congressperson, who you're running against now, Richard Neal, how did Congressman Neal assist you in this effort to advocate for a safer FAA, a safer Boeing?
Congressman Neal did not assist me. He was the last legislator to reach out to us from our area. So Jim McGovern contacted us in our grief to try to help us. Elizabeth Warren, Ed Markey, Richard Blumenthal.
Who's in Connecticut.
Yeah, who's in Connecticut. All of them reached out to us. And then my uncle, Ralph Nader, had to call Richard Neal's office and say, you haven't reached out to this family yet. So he met with my son and my husband, but he didn't do any affirmative action. You know, I went to his office and asked the person at the desk, I want to know if Boeing has been in to see the representative. And that person said to me, we can't reveal that information about Congressman Neal's schedule, or Freedom of Information Act does not apply to us. But I said, but I am an aggrieved person. Boeing killed my daughter, and so I'm materially affected. Also, I'm a constituent, and so we pay the bills for Richard Neal, so I should be able to know his schedule. No, you can't know his schedule, but other offices are transparent. So basically, when you have 770,000 people in your district, you're going to get 30,000 calls for help. And many offices are ready for that. Many offices are responsive and on it. And even all these offices that I mentioned and many, many more were responsive to me as a non-constituent. My representative's office was the worst in terms of responsiveness of all the offices that I went to. And I thought, why should this be? Why should I have to be a connected person or a favored person to Richard Neal to receive the kind of attention that I get from other legislators? That doesn't make any sense to me. And so I want to be a responsive person who will attend to all of those calls, as I've seen other offices do.
You farm, and you farm for your family, and we talk to farmers literally every week. What has it been like for you being in agriculture, especially considering that you're raising crops for your family?
So we don't have a subsistence farm. We have in the past. We have raised all our vegetables and all our meat and everything. But for the past 5 years, we've been in Washington, D.C. So the food that is raised on our farm is for the local dairy, which is the biggest dairy farm in Massachusetts. So that farmer raises corn and hay to feed his dairy herd. In that way, we have been able to continue farming with somebody else taking over the land and renting the land. It is impossible to have livestock and be running to Washington, D.C. all the time.
We're speaking with Nadia Milleron, who is running for Congress against Congressman Richie Neal in the 1st Congressional District. And I know that food and medicine are high on your priorities list. It's something we talk with Congressman McGovern about on this show week in and week out. Can you tell us what your vision is for a food system, not just in the 1st Congressional District, but in the United States, and how that dovetails with medicine as well?
The last 2 years have been the first 2 years in the history of our country where we're importing more food than we're producing in our country. That does not make any sense for the United States of America with the amount of land and the amount of resources we have. And it's also insecure for us. So when we had the supply chain issues during COVID, we couldn't get many of the imported goods, and that includes medicine. To me, it's very important to support food production here in our country and healthy and fresh food, and to connect that with food deserts and people who need it. So in Springfield, there have been many refugees who have been placed in Springfield. Some of them are from Africa. We've connected with Somali community that are farmers. They were placed in Springfield, but they don't desire to be in an urban area. They have, skills to farm. And they came out to our land and saw all of the corn we produce for cows, and they couldn't believe that that was not human food. Mm-hmm. They say, we eat this field corn, and collected a lot of it and brought it back to their communities and made fantastic food out of it. So those human beings who are by accident placed in food deserts, they can be leaders in showing how to eat fresh food, how to pursue it, how to connect with the Berkshires, for example. So in our district, we produce more food than any other district in Massachusetts, and we have more people on SNAP benefits than any other district in Massachusetts. So it's a distribution issue. And those Africans can be some of the leaders that can lead us out of that. As far as medicine, we produce generic pharmaceuticals in India and China, and whether they have good regulations or not, they definitely do not apply them. And so there are adulterated products in those generic pharmaceuticals, and we need to produce those here. We're actually producing bad medicine by not producing it here, and we're also losing the jobs. We need all of that manufacturing to be in our district and in our country.
Nadia Milleron, who is an independent candidate for U.S. House of Representatives in the 1st Congressional District of Massachusetts. On Thursday's show, you'll hear us ask the same question of the independent candidate for the 2nd Congressional District, Cornelius Shea, about who he is supporting for President of the United States. Your uncle, who I believe was, according to the New York Times article, inspirational to encouraging you to run for this office, famously ran for president many times. Some people are dismayed by that. Some people were inspired by those runs. Who are you supporting for president of the United States?
So I think that's a distraction to this race. I think that I can get work done in Washington. I am not proud of either presidential candidate. I think that we could have a lot better quality, but this is who we have, and whoever will win, I will work with that administration in order to improve the quality of life for people in my district.
Two of your campaign points are about having industry be here. And what are policies that you would like to enact to change these things here?
I've identified projects and laws that I could change to improve our quality of life that are fundamental, that I can actually move. The first one of those is bringing more doctors to our district. The second one of those is bringing more manufacturing by incentivizing through trades and trade barriers the production of food and quality goods here. China is producing most of our consumer goods, and Richard Neal has voted several times for China to have most favored nation status and to be part of the World Trade Organization. The result of that is that China produces most of what we consume, and we need to produce it ourselves. To have a good economy, you have to have about 15% manufacturing in order to have a healthy economy, and we are in our district are now below 7%.
But where do we federally start incentivizing that?
We incentivize it by having trade barriers and tariffs to not produce an item outside of our country so that it becomes more expensive to produce it outside and less expensive to produce it here.
Well, what's your take on the Trump idea of tariffs and what happened in his first administration and what he's proposed going forward? That is similar to what he's kind of proposed as well.
There's no daylight between Catherine Tai, who is the trade ambassador to the Biden administration, and Robert Lighthizer, who's the trade ambassador to the Trump administration. So they both agree on the incentive that needs to happen to reshore American manufacturing to our country.
So you think that the Biden administration's plan and then perhaps subsequently the Harris administration is not dissimilar in any material fashion?
I don't know about the Harris administration because I don't know who they would appoint for their trade ambassador. But I know that the Biden administration trade ambassador, Catherine Tai, and Robert Lighthizer, who was the Trump administration trade ambassador, have the same policy.
We're speaking with Nadia Milleron, who is running as an independent for the 1st Congressional District in the U.S. House of Representatives. This, sadly, in our state of affairs politically, may be the first time that people have even heard of you or heard that you are running. Give us your stump speech for them as why they might want to consider an independent, why they might want to consider you, as opposed to Congressman Neal, who served for over 30 years.
Consider an independent because I am not bound by a party or by other people's opinions about what I should do. I'm only bound by the needs of the district, the people in the district. And in a close House where you have almost the same number of Republicans and Democrats, an independent has incredible bargaining power because each side would be saying, please vote for my issue. And I would say, not unless you make sure you take care of the needs that are a priority for my district. More doctors, more manufacturing, food security, and control over the fentanyl that is coming in and poisoning our people.
What do you say to the people, especially on the left, who say that losing Neal in the Ways and Means Committee is too big a loss to risk?
Well, he's just working for the corporate power. He's not using his power to help the human beings here. I would have a lot of power as an independent and ability to negotiate, as I just described. But Richard Neal uses his power, substantial power, for the benefit of his funders, who are all big corporations. He has the most corporate funding of any member of Congress.
And once again, we have invited Congressman Neal to be on the show.
Since we started the show.
Since we began the show, we invite him again now, as we have invited Nadia Milleron, who has joined us, independent candidate for the 1st Congressional District of Massachusetts. I talked to your uncle one time ever on the radio, and we spent half the time talking about Yankees versus Red Sox, and he told me how much he loves Fenway, but hates the Red Sox. So I'm going to say go Dodgers, and thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you very much.
You can find even more information about candidate for Congress Nadia Milleron on her campaign pages, including any upcoming appearances in this last week ramp up to the election. Thanks so much to Nadia Milleron and her son Tor for taking the time to come down to Springfield and chat with us.
And for the cookies.
Yes, they were delicious cookies.
And again, we would love to have Congressman Neal on, cookies or no cookies.
Yes.
We
don't need baked bribes, but...
No, absolutely not.
And they won't change our opinions about people.
Absolutely not. but cookies is something that we, of all political stripes, can agree with, I believe.
And perhaps even cider donuts, which ties into the next bit.
Ah, yes, it does indeed. But on the next Fabulous 413, we're getting into traditions and legends with an exploration of the work of Max Roach, who would have turned 100 this year. I heard the UMass Marching Band, along with marching bands from all over New England, performing this Max Roach song at Band Day on Saturday. It was so great. But Genuine Culture is presenting a 3-drummer celebration at the Iron Horse of the renowned musician and former UMass professor, and we'll talk with Damani Gordon and Colin Jalbert about the long-reaching cool of Max Roach's style.
We'll also head up to Franklin County, where nearly every apple producer you've heard of and some that you haven't are gearing up for cider days, the best time of the year, hands down. We'll speak with a giant bevy of the folks involved about the area's long cider-making history, the unique parallels of palms to humans, and what apple-based activities you can expect this weekend all along the 91 corridor and into the hills.
And Emily Brewster, resident wordster from Merriam-Webster, will elucidate the English language for us. If you've got a question for the word nerd, email us thefab413@nepm.org.
English linguage.
I'm Monty Belmonte.
I'm Khalees Smith. We'll talk
see you
to you tomorrow
on the Fabulous 413.